Hello and welcome to the 17th episode of the Pepper Podcast. For those who are returning, welcome back. And if you are new, the Pepper Podcast covers a wide range of spicy events that occur in our daily lives. Two high school students tackle heated topics through discussion. I am your host, Jay Mehta, and joining me is my co-host, Indy Watanabe. And today's topic will be over water scarcity in our world and how an unequal distribution of the vital resource has socioeconomically crippled communities. According to UNICEF, 4 billion people, almost two-thirds of the world's population, experience severe water scarcity for at least 1 month each year.
Yeah, that's an incredibly alarming statistic. Like two-thirds of the world's population, right? It's
Yeah.
really hard to fathom the amount of like people who actually do go through like hardships to get clean access to water because growing up in a community that really doesn't have much water insecurity, I am very grateful to be in this position because I know a lot of people are not, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's you see it all the time, like, oh, help these people in this place because they don't have water, but you don't necessarily know like the extent to which the problem actually goes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I read some books in English. I think one of them was like A Long Walk to Water, and it talked about how hard it was to find water in communities that did not have adequate access to clean sources of water. And the amount of sickness and disease and death that happened as a result of no access to that water is staggering. And it's really hard to put into perspective because, we just don't necessarily experience that every day.
Yeah, yeah. And like just some more alarming statistics, right? Like water is used, for multitude of purposes, right? From
Right.
again, like for drinking water, we have water to, bathe. And there's many ways that we can get, those water resources from. And typically like they're from freshwater sources or, groundwater sources. But just in general, like 780 million people live without clean drinking water. More than one third of Africa's population lacks access to safe drinking water, and compared to today, 5 times as much land is likely to be under extreme drought by 2050. So, I mean, these alarming statistics really show that, like, as time progresses, and because we're not really taking like account and we're taking a measure of how much waste of this water that we're actually using,
Right.
that we're eventually going to have a situation where we're going to be in dire need of water or these the resources, and we're eventually going to have to meet that kind of quota, and either that comes through salinization, which is extremely expensive. We'll go into that later.
Yeah.
Salinization, increased legislation that centers around what more water conservation, or
Right.
the most disastrous would be like possible like conflict with other countries or
Right.
other territories for water resources.
Yeah, and I think that as we progress in our modern age, as the climate crisis does get worse over time, as it should, and due to like human activity, et cetera, the water crisis will just get worse. Droughts will become more common, and not just the like frequency of droughts, but the severity of the droughts will be increased as well. Because like this won't just impact people directly; it will, but it also impacts farmers, which
Hmm.
impacts the food production, which will also cause like starvation amongst people and like food insecurity, not just water insecurity, because water is an incredibly important resource that is vital to just like the cooking of food, the growing of food, bathing, personal hygiene, just drinking in general. Like all those things fall under the umbrella of the importance of water. And as we, as our problem keeps going unchecked, everything will just get affected. Everybody will get affected.
Yeah. And just like using an example for that, like Los Angeles County,
Right.
100% of people per the NIDIS drought.gov, 100% of people in Los Angeles County are affected by drought. 99,818,605 people in Los Angeles are affected by drought, and the 35th driest April. It was the 35th driest April on record over the past 128 years, and
Wow.
so the fourth driest year to date over the past 128 years. So, this is really showing that we're ramping up the amount of droughts, and of course, this is only one statistic. And this is in a more severe, case compared to other
Right.
places. But this really goes to show that, like, in some places where water scarcity is very important, and it's a major issue, that it's very difficult to really, you know, I guess, like, understand in other places, and
Yeah.
it's not really brought to light, in a lot of these other places, like somewhere on the East Coast or somewhere where there's a lot more, like, freshwater resources. And of course,
Yeah.
there is water scarcity that impacts all coasts, East Coast, West Coast, wherever.
Right.
But it depends on like how also the like legislation is passed and how there are prevention measures to combat that. And so like Los Angeles County, they had like a water recycling facility, and they like encouraged more people to they limited outdoor water use to 2 days per week. They banned watering during the hottest parts of the day. They banned irrigating ornamental grass at businesses, commercial sites, and much more. And so there's
Yeah.
a lot more conservation measures that are there due to their necessity in order to have water. But I guess we could learn from that in other places where we still have water resources, where we could be able to simply just, if we monitor and copy what these other places are doing, where this water's not really necessary and we could conserve it.
Yeah.
We could maybe use that and continue that further on, so that we could have more accessible, safe drinking water and just fresh water in general, for the future.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, I think it's important to put into context, as you said, the water crisis. And you mentioned California,
Hmm.
and I believe while we were discussing this topic before we recorded, you mentioned something about like the what did you say, Wonder Company
Yeah, yeah. So
and
the wonderful
their
company.
their like role in water and the crisis.
Yeah,
Could you expand upon that, please?
sure.
Thank-
So yeah, so the wonderful company, which they own a lot of the popular products today, like Palm. They have like the pistachios, the wonderful company pistachios, almonds, Halo Cuties, um, and so there's a lot of and like they're very popular brand, and Fiji Water as well. And so they are owned by the wonderful company, which is managed by the Resnicks. And so the Resnicks, basically in the Los Angeles area, control the water supply in the area,
Right.
due to some environmental loopholes through legislation. They basically have used like backroom politics, and their water
Right.
rules to
Right.
control the groundwater resources in the area, which allowed them to basically create a monopoly. And so in
Mhm.
that area, there's an extreme disparity, which we talked about in the introduction. Um, there's an extreme disparity where there's people, where you can see luscious green like almond trees, and
Right.
you see like just like really like barren, dry area right around it, where
Exactly.
these people don't have enough water to flush their toilets or get like a drink of water in the day. Um, it's very difficult for people to meet day and day's end, just because they don't have the access to that fresh water because it's really being controlled, um, by like the Resnicks. And
Yeah.
so they've
Yeah.
rebranded all their holdings as like the Wonderful Company, and they've made it a like philanthropic business, but
Yeah.
it's really like hiding the fact that they are um completely just taking the entire they're spinning
Yeah.
the narrative to make them look good, when in fact they're
Mhm.
really controlling a necessary and vital resource to human life.
Right. And yeah, it's a private company, right?
Yes.
The revenue is approximately $4 billion.
Yeah.
The headquarters are in LA. As you said, 100% of the people in LA experience the effects of drought.
Yeah.
And as the wonderful company exists today, they do, control a lot of the water, the fresh water that is needed to grow the almonds, because remember it's like one almond requires like a gallon of water.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if they have like almonds, pistachios, pomegranates, uh halo, and also like Fiji water, as you said. That is a lot of water,
Yeah.
right? A lot of fresh water that's going in, and they're being like sold as a commodity and being sold as a good. And so they're profiting off of water, whereas they're also negatively affecting people who also require the water to live, right?
Yeah.
And they acquire this water through like long-term contracts. There's also some shady business, like you said, like lobbying and like backdoor politics.
Hmm.
And I don't think that's right, but it's kind of what companies in America have kind of been allowed to do to be able to operate, and it's just a dire situation.
Yeah, and like you said, like talking about how like there's a lot of water intensive crops. Like some of like the highly water intensive crops include like rice, soybeans, wheat,
Right.
sugarcane, cotton, alfalfa, pasture. But like some of those are necessary, right? Rice is
Exactly.
necessary
Yeah.
because it's very like filling.
Yeah.
While like almonds are not a necessity. And a lot of the produce and products that the wonderful company produces do not need a whole lot of or they sorry I mean they need a whole lot of water to produce, but they're not a necessity fully, or they don't really fill you up, and are not
Right.
filling. And so
Right.
a lot of water is being quote unquote wasted, um, just for the fact, just so that they can control really the monopoly. And it's almost
Hmm.
like a um I guess for lack of a better word, like a flex of a situation where they're able to control the amount, the water, where they're not,
Yeah.
where they can have as many luscious crops as they can, whereas the other residents in the area can't even,
Yeah. Yeah.
just take a shower in the morning. And
Right.
so because of that, they're able to capitalize on their income. And like you said, the revenue is around $4.2 billion. So that's a lot of money. And so
Yeah.
but there are other, like I said, like the issue over water is so large in other areas. Um, in Tennessee, we don't really have that issue that's really
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
big as Los Angeles. But
Yeah.
shady practices occur like a lot in all, in tons of areas where water is being stolen from the Colorado River, and it's being, there are more channels that are being created, man-made channels, that are redirecting the water sources, from the aqueducts and these water basins. And so as a result of that, a lot of water is and groundwater is being depleted from those areas, and the
Yeah.
natural flow is being altered, which is disrupting the wildlife in the area and is creating a lot of ecological issues
Right.
in the
Right.
area surrounding the Colorado River.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the like circling back to that food thing. Like I was wrong. One California almond requires 12 liters of water,
Yeah.
and the fact that 80% of the world's almonds come from California should that that's a lot of water.
Yeah.
And I'd also like to talk about the sugarcane. Um, sugarcane, especially from Pakistan. Um, sugarcane is one of the most water intensive crops, and it takes about 210 liters of water to produce 1 kilogram of sugarcane.
Yeah.
And the UN Environment Program said that there was absolutely no justification in Pakistan for sugarcane. And it's like sugarcane has been proven to have one of the lowest recovery rates of any plant in the world. It's like you can water the amount of sugarcane as you would a forest, whereas a forest would contribute back, oxygen to the
Yeah.
world, ecological and like environmental like
Benefits.
sustainability for plants and animals and ecosystems. Whereas sugarcane, it provides sugar for like people
Yeah.
and like candy, whatever, whatever. And it doesn't recover.
Mm-hmm.
It takes super long to recover. And 80% of the water supply in Pakistan for sugarcane comes from irrigation and groundwater reserves.
Mm-hmm.
And like government subsidiaries or subsidies for groundwater extraction means farmers don't view water as a precious resource because like the government's like subsidizing it, and so it's like they're depleting the water sources from the people of Pakistan. And Pakistan is like a country where water access isn't as abundant as say a more developed country, say like
Yeah.
England or America, right? That's proven by statistics. And also I want to also talk about rice from Punjab in like India.
Yeah.
um, India is one of the world's leading rice exporters.
Yeah.
Like to the Western world, to like Asia, at wherever. And rice uses 1,670 liters of water, which is 8 full bathtubs per kilogram,
Wow.
according to the Water Footprint Network. And like I know that there was a Columbia University research thing that said that India experienced chronic water stress due to heavy water extraction from irrigated agriculture. So a lot of the water that comes from India that's used to plant and grow rice is from underground kind of pools of fresh water. And if you didn't know, rice is grown in like rice fields. And I've had the privilege to like go onto a rice field and see how they grow and plant rice. and it's like a mud field, and it's super wet, and you walk, and it's like it's literally like soaked. It's flooded half the year or something.
Mm-hmm.
And according to the nonprofit WaterAid, India's rate of groundwater depletion increased by 23% between 2000 and 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And India uses more groundwater than anywhere in the world,
Yeah.
which is 24% of the total global population. And 1 billion people live in water scarce areas in India.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's about half of the population of India live in water scarce regions. And the fact that they're like pumping out all this rice to like the world and exporting all that to get that like to increase their GDP, like
Mhm.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but when you look into the negative effects of that, it's far more grim than what you may seem. Like you may think that, oh, they're exporting a lot of rice, that's good, but also like their people are like dying
Suffering
of
as a result.
thirst.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
And so this also stems from like um the unequal distribution of not just like water resources but like wealth in general or like
Right.
power, where there's a whole not like there's like a really big like scarcity and like just like the difference between like your average person, especially in India,
Mhm.
compared to like in the United States. It's a lot better compared to other countries that are less fortunate, like India and like I said, Pakistan, where there's so much of a disparity between the classes there that
Right.
it's very difficult to like really just I could distribute evenly like the resources. And so like as a result, like the lower classes are really starving and well they're famished actually instead of starving, whereas these other more I guess like higher class and richer these people are like just benefiting and profiting off of the exports. And also like going off of that, like in not just in India is where like like a rice is such a big staple in their
Mhm.
diet, right? There's tons of other countries where rice is, especially in primarily
Right.
in Eastern Asian
Eastern
countries and
Asia, yeah.
South
Yeah.
Asian countries,
Yeah.
um, where rice is a very big it's an important factor in the diet, and so as a result a lot of rice is produced. And so
Right.
in those countries it's a lot more common to see more water allocation towards that, and in order to
Yeah.
meet a growing population more rice and therefore more water is needed to produce the amount of rice necessary or the amount of food generally necessary for the
Right.
population. And so trying to meet that standard has really, like you said, depleted groundwater resources. And just like pulling up a map of like the United States and like groundwater depletion over time,
Mhm.
and it's really
Mhm.
showing like and how I talked about like the Colorado River and things like that.
Yeah.
There's like a really prominent region. Um, can you guess where there's a excessive groundwater depletion at?
You should, what is it, Jay?
It's Colorado. And so there's there's like an excessive amount of groundwater depletion in Colorado, in Arizona, um, like mid to Southern California, and in the Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, East or like West Tennessee region. And
Yeah.
so a lot of the um, water that is being depleted there, is made. Oh, sorry, I forgot to include. And this is something we can talk about later, but like in the Midwest area, and so as a result, like the major amounts of groundwater depletion are be due to, in order to meet a stable amount of
Yeah.
food and or a stable amount of water, they have to, take out the water from the groundwater from these sources and use it for their, own benefit. And as a result, we're depleting our groundwater resources, and it takes very long for them to fill, and we are not filling them ourselves. And so
Right.
because of that, we're just perpetually drying out. There it is, perpetual cycle of drying out
Yeah.
our resources. And so this
Right.
is really not good for our economy in general. And it's also something interesting that you talked about, like how much water is going into like other consumer items. Like you said, you think you're using like a water footprint calculator or the water footprint .org, but
Yeah. Yeah.
just going off another like source, like there's like a lot of things that you would never really expect, but that has so much. Like beef, we all know, it's very, very water intensive. And
Yep.
that's why it's very there are a lot better alternatives um like poultry, where it consumes less water, or
Yeah.
just going on an vegetarian vegan diet. But
Right.
that's also has some nuance to it, right? Because like I said, in the Midwest region, a lot of water is used to fuel um or to create biofuel, or like just produce or corn specifically. And so a lot of produce, when it's requires a lot of water, depending on the time, because it gets very cold there, they require like very specialized farming, like agricultural water practices. And so these
Yeah.
irrigation practices can cost a lot of money. And so there are like four main types, which is drip irrigation, spray irrigation, furrow irrigation, and flood irrigation. And so drip irrigation produces like the least amount of excess water,
Yeah.
whereas it's still extremely expensive. And then spray, and then furrow, and then flood. And so
Yeah.
gradually you lose a lot more water as a result, but it becomes more cheaper. And so just like going back to what I was saying about common consumer items, leather shoes, because of cows, they cost 2,113 gallons of water, or 8,000 liters to produce.
Yeah.
A smartphone, 3,190 gallons.
Hmm.
Cotton jeans, 2,886 gallons of water.
Yeah.
Cotton's very big, it's a very water intensive crop. T-shirt, just a single t-shirt costs 659 gallons of water if it's cotton. And so it's a lot. And going into cars, like cars are a lot more, 13,737 to 21,926 gallons of water. It's a lot of water, that could go into, either creating more produce, or um, d- putting that back into groundwater resources, or really just helping out the community in decreasing the divide in just socioeconomic conditions between these people.
Right.
And so there's really a lot of pertinent issues going on today in our society as a result. And so we don't really know, like, and especially like moving in the future, the
Right.
scarcity has been pointed out a lot more due to social media perpetuating it, and there's a lot more documentaries, and a lot more
Mhm.
information is brought out. But going into the future, as we could become more scarce in water supplies, um, creating this divide, or like filling the divide that's only going to be ever so more increasing, is something that our society is going to really struggle with. And not to mention a single plastic water bottle has a relatively low water impact compared to the rest of the items that I listed before. However, it takes more than 3/4 of a gallon to produce a quarter gallon or 1 liter bottle. And so it costs 3/4 of a gallon to produce a quarter gallon bottle. So 3 gallons of water is needed to produce a quarter gallon bottle to hold a quarter gallon. So you're wasting a whole gallon of water for the jug and a quarter gallon of water. So that just statistic is really
Yeah.
mind-boggling for me. I think I repeated it like 4 times, just
Yeah.
because like that's so exorbitant, right? And I feel like that's so counterintuitive, because I mean, although we do need like
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
containers to store our water, creating something that requires more
Yeah.
water than it actually holds is something that just is very counterintuitive, and does
Yeah.
not really
Yeah.
help our society,
Yeah.
and especially because we're in a water shortage.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm glad you talked about like the meat, especially because that kind of like segues into its effect on like ecosystems directly and indigenous peoples, because that's really important to take into consideration. Like, especially the beef industry, right? How you
Yeah.
talked about how it takes so much water to produce beef
Yeah.
alone, because like you need to grow the crops that the cows are going to eat, then feed the cows the water, and then the water that's used to process the meat and to ship the meat, etc., etc. Like, I think we mentioned this in like our very first episode, but in the Amazon rainforest, a lot of the forest is getting cut down because of the meat industry, like the
Mhm.
beef industry especially. And that's not only destroying natural habitat, but it's also displacing indigenous peoples and polluting their environment and even like rivers. And I know some indigenous peoples have sued like actual like meat companies, but like, yeah, they really, I don't know if they've won anything. I really hope they have, because indigenous peoples are very important to our community and to wildlife and ecosystems because they know how to live efficiently and sustainably when it comes to food, water, just like resources in general. They know how to live efficiently because they've had to adapt to doing that. And when a company comes in and like destroys their land, it's very heartbreaking.
Yeah, yeah.
But
And
yeah,
like you said about like how indigenous farmers are being exploited. Um,
right.
not just again like not just indigenous farmers are being exploited. Although yes, it is a very pertinent issue. Just generally, just overall, like an overall general farmers are just really struggling as a result of these water scarcities because I mean their whole life depends on water because either producing cattle, either producing produce, you're farming which requires water, to make crops grow or make your produce grow or make your cattle grow or your livestock. And so from just finding like an article about this dude named Paul Bruches. He is a farmer in the well, that's by the Colorado River, and because the Colorado River has shrunk by an average 20% compared to the last century, the area is suffering the worst regional dry spell on record. But that's not the biggest problem. Cows are, and so cows account for around 23% of all water consumption. 23% of all water connection or
That's
consumption.
insane.
But in the Colorado River Basin, it's over half. And so there are many smaller streams have been dried up completely, and like I've been saying this before. And so agriculture accounts for 92% of humanity's freshwater footprint across the planet. And
Right.
so, you know, if a cows are, taking 23% of the available water that we have, you know,
Yeah.
that that's completely exorbitant because there are
Right.
better options, and this is why like a lot more there are options that are really presented. And in addition to like the benefits of not harvesting cattle for environmental reasons such as like less methane
Yeah.
production, um it's still there's better, I guess, like solutions where it consumes less water,
Right.
and you're still getting full. You're still being filled up, and you're not having to,
Yeah.
consecutively eat, because there are
Right.
some products that you could supplement it with, and that's why I said going on a vegetarian diet, especially with water scarcity, is
Yeah.
something that's very nuanced because it depends on where you get, I guess, your vegetables and your produce from,
Yeah. Yeah.
because some, like I said, use other kinds of irrigation practices that waste a lot of water. Like cabbages are very, um, they're kind of low maintenance, but they use a lot more like just like furrow and flood irrigation, where
Right.
a lot of water is just wasted as a result. And so, although you may think that you're consuming less water, you're still overall your water footprint is a lot greater maybe than other in some cases.
Yeah.
But just generally, switching from beef to maybe some more chicken, or going on a more plant-based diet, and that's why a lot more plant-based industries are booming right now, like Beyond Meat and these plant-based patties, because they decrease the amount of water, your water footprint,
Right.
and they don't taste the same. From what I've heard, I mean, I'm vegetarian, so I wouldn't really know, but um they are better for the environment, right? They
Yeah.
decrease your water footprint, and they provide generally around the same amount of protein. And so those kind of gestures add up over time, especially considering, you know, beef consumption in more developed countries is very high. I
Right.
could probably find a statistic on it later, but like as you become more developed, I remember reading a statistic that as you become more developed, you tend to consume more and more and more meat. And so, especially in the United States, where beef is a very vital kind of like important ingredient in
Right.
just the general consensus of people's bodies. So in
Yeah.
hamburgers and in
Yeah.
barbecues and and tons of things, like decreasing that dependency on cattle and decreasing that dependency um, on that resource
Mhm.
would lower our water footprint and would just better equip us to tackle a lot more issues concerning water in the future, and would let us save and conserve our water so that maybe like in the future we would be able to afford a lot more, just like we would be able to maybe like last longer in terms of water scarcity.
Yeah, I agree. And I just wanted to take some minutes just to talk about some possible solutions. While it's hard for us as high school students to, directly improve water scarcity in other countries and even the world, right? It's our duty to educate and spread awareness of the issue and the research that shows what's actually happening, right? And
Mhm.
some viable solutions include like improving infrastructure, whether it be natural or man-made, right? In different countries can definitely like it can like build, pump, transport, divert, store, treat, deliver safe drinking water to millions and millions of people, right? We just need the right infrastructure. There's also something like when I was talking about India and Pakistan and like even Thailand, because I know it's literally Bangkok's literally sinking because they get like their fresh water from the ground, and so like it's called groundwater recharge or like aquifer storage and recovery, and it's like artificial groundwater recharging,
Mhm.
and it has been proven to like increase the amount of fresh water while decreasing water scarcity. And it's like a series of pumps that pump water in and out of the ground and like treat it and store it and recover it from the ground. And I saw that and I thought I saw a documentary on that and I thought that was really interesting. Also
Mhm.
like pollution contamination control because like pollution plays a large part in water scarcity because it's really hard to have access to safe drinking water if it's not safe, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and like rainwater harvesting or water catchment, like our old house used to have this rainwater like catcher, and we'd use it to like water our plants and like just like rinse our hands, stuff like that. And I think that, and even like in small countries, like there's this thing called water credit or like water equity, and it can help like provide like an incentive to have better drinking water. The government provides that incentive for them to get money and that they can get paid back with like fresh drinking water per like a family.
Yeah.
And also finally like research and technology can help improve water infrastructure. Stuff like reverse osmosis, electrodialysis reversal
Mhm.
or EDR, desalinization,
Yeah.
nanofiltration, and solar and UV filtration can all help filter and clean water for people to use. It just takes a lot of money at the end of the day, you
Yeah.
know?
And
Yeah.
just adding off of what you said, especially with like desalinization, I didn't really talk about it a whole lot. The reason why, like, if you ever question yourself, like when I was talking about like LA, like they're literally right next to the ocean. Like, why can't they just like drink that? Like I said,
Yeah.
we can only really drink fresh water because the water in the
Yeah.
ocean is very salty, and so
Yeah.
water has to the water in the from the ocean from the Pacific Ocean has to go through desalinization process, where
Yeah.
we remove all like all the salts from the water, but the issue with that is it's so expensive and energy
Right.
consuming that it's
Right.
not viable to do that right now. And so, like you said, developing energy efficient desalinization plants would definitely like solve water scarcity. Would
Right.
not or
Right.
would better equip
Help
us to
help reduce water
exactly
scarcity.
would reduce water scarcity for sure.
Right.
Just because we would be using um a different kind of source that is still very abundant at this time. And
Right.
just like in general, right? Like we would just be using a lot less groundwater
Yeah.
resources, freshwater resources, and we'd
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
looking somewhere else. But
Yeah. I
that's
know.
good.
Yeah. No, I was gonna say I know like Saudi Arabia has like 85% of their fresh water is desalinated, like from the ocean.
Yeah,
But because Saudi Arabia is rich in oil and
yeah,
they're very rich, they have the ability to do that, whereas other countries don't. But
yeah.
continue.
And yeah, like you said, like and that also comes to like inadequacy of
Right.
resources.
Right.
And it really a lot of our podcast episodes, just going off on a tangent, like discuss this idea, just this overarching idea of greed and how greed
Right.
has like
Right.
really pushed a lot of social issues and socioeconomic issues today. And with the idea of greed, and greed is just a natural human emotion, um, or just a feeling that we all have. But like going on like a more just industrial scale, not necessarily individual greed, but like how an individual greed and an individualistic thinking has funneled and grown and grown and grown. And when conglomerates are created with the entire thought of greed, has led to, a lot of issues in our society that face us today. Sorry, going off on a tangent. Um,
There you go.
Recycling like wastewater, like you said, reduce, reuse, recycle is something that everybody knows. But recycling our water and conserving our water,
Right.
um,
Exactly.
just decreasing the amount of water that you use and
Do your
trying
part,
to,
right?
yeah, right, doing your part, like you said, it adds up over time.
Yeah.
Just maybe turn off the water. when you're brushing, like I feel like everybody says this all the time, you know, um,
Yeah.
just like turn off the shower if you're not using it. Just use less water or use as much, or use
Right.
as less water as you can, because it adds up truly over time.
Yeah.
And appropriately like pricing water. Um, just appropriately priced water, especially in areas where water pricing is very, very like just like very scarce, and so it's as a result it's very expensive in some areas. Appropriately pricing that by either getting more water resources from a different area could really help out the situation in those communities. So yeah.
Yeah. And with that, our discussion comes to an end. We thank you for listening and hope you'll stay tuned for future episodes. Don't forget to follow the Pepper Podcast on Instagram, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Google Podcasts. Thank you.
Thank you.